A Texas judge, well-respected, admired, trusted. A man who upheld the law, a symbol of justice in a small town where everyone knew his name. People shook his hand in the streets, sought his wisdom in the courtroom, and believed in his judgment. And then, there was the sheriff, the man who kept order, the law enforcer who stood for integrity, discipline, and protection. Two pillars of the community. Two men whose lives were built on trust, on authority, on the unshakable belief that justice was above all. But trust, as we know, is fragile. And power, when left unchecked, can become something else entirely. The sheriff had a daughter, young, full of life, with dreams that stretched beyond the small town she called home. To most, she was just a high school senior, a girl on the edge of adulthood. But to one man, she was something else. Behind closed doors, in secret meetings, in whispered phone calls and hidden rendezvous, an affair took shape, one that should never have existed. An affair that defied everything the judge stood for, everything the sheriff had sworn to protect. It started quietly. A glance. A lingering moment. A conversation that crossed the line before either of them realized it. And then, it became more. It could have ended there, as a shameful secret tucked away in the shadows. But secrets have a way of unraveling. When she found out she was pregnant, everything changed. A secret could be hidden, but a child? A life? That was undeniable. That was permanent. And then came another revelation, one far worse, one that turned whispers of scandal into a chilling nightmare. The judge had given her something else. Not just his time. Not just his affection. Something he could never take back. The kind of thing that destroys lives, that reshapes futures, that turns a secret into something far more dangerous. The weight of it was too much. The betrayal. The shame. The fear. And then, in a moment no one saw coming, she was gone. A life taken too soon. A death that should never have happened. But was it an accident? A desperate act? Or was it something much worse? And when the truth finally came out, when the walls of power and influence could no longer hold back the flood, this small town learned that justice is not always what it seems. That those who wear the robes, those who carry the badges, are not always the ones who can be trusted. Stay with us as we uncover the shocking truth behind the Texas judge's secret affair, the sheriff's daughter, and the murder that shattered lives. Make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this one. It started in a town where people believed in the system. A place where law and order meant something, where trust and authority was second nature. The judge had spent years building his name, sitting on the bench, handing down sentences, and ensuring justice was served. He had a reputation, firm but fair, a man who understood the weight of the law and the responsibility that came with it. His rulings carried weight, his words held power, and in the eyes of the town, he was untouchable. The sheriff, a man cut from the same cloth, was just as respected. Decades in law enforcement had made him a fixture of the community, a man people depended on. He patrolled the streets, attended town meetings, gave speeches at high school graduations. His badge meant something. And his daughter, well, she was just another teenager, growing up in the shadow of men who commanded respect. No one had any reason to suspect that behind all of this, behind the honor, the reputation, the law itself, there was something happening that no one would have ever imagined. The affair was never supposed to happen. The judge was a married man, a father, someone who had built a life that seemed, from the outside, almost perfect. He had power, influence, and the ability to change lives with a single ruling. She was young, full of hope, with a future ahead of her that should have been untouched by scandal. But in private, the lines blurred. It wasn't clear when it started or how, whether it was a chance meeting at a courthouse, an innocent conversation that took a turn, or a moment of weakness that spiraled into something neither of them could stop. But once it began, there was no undoing it. It was reckless, dangerous, and completely wrong. And yet, it continued. It could have stayed hidden, and for a while, it did. Late-night phone calls, secret meetings, stolen moments behind closed doors. But secrets have a way of slipping through the cracks. The girl started changing. She was distracted, distant. The people who knew her best saw it, her best friend, her mother, even the sheriff himself. But no one could have imagined the truth. And then, she found out she was pregnant. For the judge, this wasn't just an affair anymore. It was a threat. His reputation, his career, everything he had worked for, at risk. And then came the test results. The kind of news that doesn't just change a life but shatters it. She had contracted something that couldn't be undone, something that made the betrayal even deeper, the horror even worse. And now, she was trapped. There was no way to pretend this never happened, no way to erase what had been done. She was scared. Conflicted. Desperate. She confided in a friend, whispered pieces of the truth in hushed tones, unsure of what to do next. But she never got the chance to figure it out. Because soon after, she was gone. A call came in, a body discovered, lifeless, in a place where no one expected to find her. At first, people wanted to believe it was an accident. Maybe she took her own life, overcome with the weight of everything. Maybe she couldn't handle the shame, the fear, the betrayal. That's what some said. That's what some wanted to believe. But then, the details started to come out. The inconsistencies. The things that didn't add up. And suddenly, it wasn't just a tragedy. It was something much worse. The sheriff, a man who had spent his life bringing criminals to justice, was now facing a horror he never imagined, his own daughter, gone. And as the investigation began, pieces of the truth started slipping out, piece by piece, until the picture became undeniable. This wasn't just a scandal. This wasn't just a mistake. This was something much darker. And the man who had spent his career handing down sentences now found himself at the center of the kind of crime he once condemned. Stay with us as we uncover the investigation, the shocking twists, and the trial that gripped an entire town. If you haven't already, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what happens next. Judge David Thompson sat in the highest seat of law in the county, a man whose very presence commanded authority. For over 2 decades, he had presided over the courtroom with an unwavering hand, delivering sentences that shaped lives, deciding the fate of criminals, and ensuring justice was served. His reputation was one of strict adherence to the law, a judge who did not tolerate dishonesty or moral corruption. But behind the polished image, there was another side to him, one that no one saw coming. He was a man with secrets, and when they started unraveling, the very foundation of everything he built began to crumble. Emily Harris was young, full of promise, and eager to step into the world of law and justice. The daughter of Sheriff Robert Harris, she had grown up watching her father enforce the law, listening to stories of criminals brought to justice. She wanted to follow in his footsteps, dreaming of one day becoming a lawyer, maybe even a judge. She was the kind of girl people admired, smart, driven, full of life. But she was also naive, too trusting, and drawn to things she didn't fully understand. She saw Judge Thompson as a mentor, someone who could guide her. She didn't see the danger. She didn't realize that stepping into his world would be a mistake she could never take back. Sheriff Robert Harris had dedicated his life to protecting the people of his town. He had worn the badge for over 30 years, his career built on loyalty, integrity, and service. He was a father first and an officer second, and nothing mattered more to him than his family. He thought he had done everything right, raising his daughter with discipline, instilling in her a strong sense of morality. He believed she was safe. He believed she was making the right choices. But the truth was unfolding right in front of him, and he had no idea. By the time he saw the signs, it was already too late. Detective Maria Lopez had seen her fair share of crime, but nothing prepared her for this case. A seasoned investigator with a reputation for leaving no stone unturned, she was relentless when it came to the pursuit of justice. She didn't let power intimidate her. She didn't let reputations get in the way of the truth. When she was assigned to the case, she knew it wouldn't be easy. She was dealing with people in high places, with a judge who had influence and a sheriff who had everything to lose. But none of that mattered. A girl was dead, and Maria was determined to find out why. As the pieces started coming together, the web of deception became clearer. The relationships, the hidden meetings, the warnings ignored. This wasn't just a scandal. It was something much worse. And as the investigation pressed forward, it became clear that no one, not even the most powerful man in the courtroom, was above the law. Emily Harris had always trusted authority, believed in the power of justice, and respected the people who upheld the law. She had grown up seeing her father as an honorable man, someone who protected the town, someone who would never let harm come to those he cared about. But in the secrecy of her own life, she found herself entangled in something she could no longer control. Judge David Thompson had become more than a mentor, more than a respected figure in her world. He had become something dangerous, something that blurred the lines between trust and betrayal. It started with private conversations, words of encouragement, promises that felt too good to ignore. It moved to meetings in places no one would question, inside his office, in quiet corners of the courthouse, places where an innocent explanation was always ready if anyone asked. Then it became something else, something hidden, something wrong. She hadn't thought much of it at first, how quickly her life had begun to change. The secrecy was thrilling at times, the attention intoxicating. He was a man with influence, someone who could shape her future, someone she admired. But admiration turned into something far more dangerous. There was a power imbalance she hadn't considered. She was a girl just beginning to understand the world. He was a man who had spent his life mastering control. By the time she realized how deep she was in, it was already too late. Then came the night that changed everything. Emily was late. At first, she ignored it. Stress, she thought. It had to be stress. But as the days passed, the truth became harder to dismiss. When she finally gathered the courage to take a pregnancy test, the two pink lines stared back at her like a sentence she couldn't escape. Panic set in. She was 17, barely old enough to understand the consequences of what she had done. How could she tell her father? How could she tell anyone? The one person she thought she could turn to was the same person she feared the most, Judge Thompson. She met him in private, her hands shaking, her voice barely steady as she told him what had happened. But his reaction was not what she expected. There was no reassurance, no comfort, no promise that everything would be okay. Instead, there was anger, frustration, something cold behind his eyes. He told her it had to be handled. That it couldn't get out. That she had to be careful. She left that meeting feeling more alone than she ever had in her life. The sickness started not long after. At first, she thought it was just from the stress, from the pregnancy. But then it got worse. Fevers, fatigue, a deep exhaustion that she couldn't shake. A visit to the clinic brought an answer she never expected. HIV. The doctor's words blurred together. She barely remembered walking out of the office. The weight of what had happened crashed down on her all at once. Someone had done this to her. Someone she trusted. The walls closed in around her. There was nowhere to turn. She sat in her room for hours, staring at the results, her hands trembling. She told no one at first, kept it buried inside, afraid of what the truth would mean. When she finally broke down and told her best friend, the weight became too much to carry. The words spilled out between sobs, the horror of what had happened making her voice shake. The fear, the betrayal, the shame. The friend begged her to go to her father, to tell someone, to do something. But Emily couldn't. She was trapped in a secret too big to escape. Then, just days later, she was gone. Her body was found in a wooded area just outside town. No signs of struggle. No obvious cause of death. Just a girl whose life had unraveled in the span of weeks, whose dreams had been stripped away before they ever had a chance to begin. The news spread fast. A sheriff's daughter, a promising young woman, dead without warning. It didn't make sense. To those who knew her, Emily was full of life. She had plans, she had dreams. People whispered about what could have happened, about what she could have been hiding. But no one knew the truth. No one knew the weight she had been carrying, the fear that had haunted her in her final days. Then came the discovery that changed everything. Emily's friend couldn't stay silent. Racked with guilt, she came forward, telling detectives about the pregnancy, about the HIV diagnosis, about the secret she had been forced to keep. The information blew the case wide open. It wasn't just a tragedy anymore. It was something far more sinister. It was evidence of a hidden world, a world of corruption and abuse, of power wielded in the shadows. And at the center of it all, a man who had spent his life passing judgment on others, now facing the kind of scrutiny he had always believed himself to be above. Judge David Thompson's name was now in whispers throughout the town. A man of the law. A man with influence. But also, a man with secrets. Secrets that were starting to come to light. Secrets that had led to a girl's death. But what exactly had happened that night? Had Emily taken her own life, overwhelmed by the weight of it all? Or had someone made sure she would never speak? The truth was about to surface, and when it did, it would shake the town to its core. Detective Maria Lopez had seen her fair share of tragic cases, but something about Emily Harris's death didn't sit right with her. From the moment she arrived at the scene, she felt it. The way Emily's body was found, too neat, too staged. The lack of any clear struggle, yet an overwhelming sense that something had gone terribly wrong. The initial assessment pointed to suicide. A young girl in distress, overwhelmed by circumstances no one fully understood. But Lopez had been in this line of work long enough to know that first impressions could be deceiving. And in a town like this, where power moved in silent, invisible ways, she wasn't willing to take anything at face value. She started with the basics: Emily's last known movements, her recent behavior, her medical history. Witnesses were questioned. Friends. Teachers. Family. Her father, Sheriff Robert Harris, was barely holding himself together. He wanted answers, but more than that, he wanted justice. He refused to believe his daughter had taken her own life. Emily had dreams, goals, a future ahead of her. He insisted she wouldn't have thrown that away, no matter how difficult things had become. But grief had a way of blinding people to the truth, and Lopez knew she couldn't let emotion dictate the course of the investigation. Then came the first break in the case, Emily's best friend. Shaken, hesitant, but unwilling to stay silent any longer. The story spilled out in pieces. The secret relationship with Judge Thompson. The pregnancy. The devastating HIV diagnosis. The fear that had consumed Emily in those final days. It was more than Lopez had expected, and it changed everything. Suddenly, Emily wasn't just a girl who had been struggling in silence. She was a girl who had been trapped in a nightmare. And at the center of it all was a man who had spent his life upholding the law, now entangled in something far darker than anyone had imagined. Lopez pressed forward. Emily's phone was recovered, her messages combed through. And there it was, the proof no one wanted to believe existed. Texts between Emily and Judge Thompson. Desperate pleas. Promises. Threats masked as concern. The tone shifted as the weeks passed. At first, there was reassurance, as if he was trying to manage the situation. Then, frustration. And finally, something colder. Something final. The last message Emily ever sent went unanswered. Forensic analysis revealed even more troubling details. There were no drugs or alcohol in Emily's system, nothing to suggest she had taken her own life. But there were inconsistencies, bruises that didn't match the way her body had been found. Signs that she had been moved post-mortem. Small details that might have been overlooked in a rushed investigation but stood out under Lopez's scrutiny. It wasn't suicide. It was something else entirely. Judge Thompson was brought in for questioning. He maintained his composure, denied any wrongdoing. Yes, he knew Emily. Yes, he had mentored her. But anything beyond that? Lies. Baseless accusations. He painted himself as a victim of a desperate girl's fantasies. Someone trying to ruin him. But Lopez wasn't buying it. The evidence was piling up, and the more she dug, the worse it got. Financial records showed unexplained transactions. Quiet payouts to an unnamed medical facility, Emily's clinic. A paper trail that pointed to a cover-up. Then came the final piece. Surveillance footage. Grainy, but clear enough. A vehicle matching Judge Thompson's parked near the wooded area on the night Emily died. A figure stepping out. Time-stamped movements that lined up too perfectly with the estimated time of death. The careful, practiced life he had built was starting to crack. When the arrest came, the town was in shock. A man once trusted to uphold justice now accused of the unthinkable. But for Detective Lopez, the work was far from over. Because one question still lingered, was Judge Thompson the only one involved? Or were there more secrets waiting to be uncovered? The courtroom was packed from the very first day of the trial. Journalists, legal analysts, and members of the community filled every available seat, some driven by curiosity, others by a need for closure. Judge David Thompson, once a symbol of authority and justice, now sat in the defendant's chair, his face emotionless as the charges were read aloud. The weight of the accusations hung heavy in the air: murder, misconduct, abuse of power. The very laws he had once enforced were now the same ones being used to hold him accountable. The prosecution wasted no time laying out their case. They started with the foundation, the affair. Witnesses took the stand, painting a picture of a relationship that had been hidden in secrecy, one that should have never existed. Emily's best friend recounted the late-night confessions, the fear in Emily's voice as she realized the truth of her situation. Medical professionals confirmed the pregnancy and the HIV diagnosis. Digital forensic experts presented the recovered text messages, revealing the shift in tone from concern to something more calculated. Then came the evidence that tied Judge Thompson to the night of Emily's death. The surveillance footage, the financial records, the inconsistencies in his alibi. The prosecution argued that Thompson had every reason to want Emily silenced. A scandal of this magnitude would have destroyed his career, his marriage, his entire life. They painted him as a man who had spent years controlling every aspect of his world, and when something threatened that control, he had resorted to the most extreme measure. But the defense fought back. They poked holes in the forensic findings, arguing that the bruises on Emily's body could have been from an unrelated event. They emphasized the lack of DNA evidence linking Thompson directly to the crime scene. His legal team suggested alternative theories. That Emily had met someone else that night, that her death was the result of something unrelated to their client. They portrayed him as a man who had made a mistake but was now the victim of a rush to judgment. The testimonies were emotional, raw. Emily's father, Sheriff Robert Harris, took the stand, his voice steady but filled with grief. He spoke of the daughter he had lost, of the betrayal he felt not just as a father but as an officer of the law. His words left an impact, reminding the jury that this wasn't just a scandal, it was a tragedy that had shattered lives. The deliberations were long. The jury had to weigh everything. Was the evidence strong enough to convict? There was no clear confession, no direct physical evidence tying Thompson to the murder itself. But there was motive, there was opportunity, and there was a pattern of deception that couldn't be ignored. When the verdict was finally read, the room was silent. Guilty. Not of first-degree murder, as the prosecution had hoped, but of second-degree murder. A charge that carried a heavy sentence, 25 years in prison. For some, it was justice. For others, it was a reminder that power and influence could still shape outcomes in ways that weren't always fair. As Judge Thompson was led away, his expression remained unchanged. He had spent years sentencing others, determining their fates. Now, the system he had once controlled had decided his. But for those left behind, Emily's family, her friends, the sentence didn't bring closure. Nothing could erase what had been lost. Nothing could bring Emily back. And in the end, that was the real tragedy of it all. Power and influence can shape lives in ways both seen and unseen. This case was more than just a scandal, it was a tragedy that exposed deep cracks in the very system meant to uphold justice. A judge, sworn to interpret and enforce the law, used his position to manipulate, deceive, and, ultimately, destroy. A sheriff, a man who spent his career protecting his community, was forced to face the unimaginable, a crime that hit his own home. A young girl, full of promise, lost her future to a man who should have never been part of her life in the first place. It raises questions that cannot be ignored. How many times has power been used as a shield, allowing those in positions of authority to escape the consequences of their actions? How often do victims, too afraid or too powerless, suffer in silence? And how many cases like this never come to light because the truth is buried before it can be told? The justice system is built on the idea of fairness and accountability, but cases like this show that it can also be manipulated by those who know it best. When the people who are meant to uphold the law become the ones breaking it, where does that leave the rest of us? What safeguards need to be in place to prevent this from happening again? And when lines between personal choices and criminal actions become blurred, how do we ensure that those who abuse their influence are held responsible, no matter who they are? This case is a warning. A reminder that no title, no amount of power, no reputation is above the truth. But it is also a painful lesson about the cost of silence, about the lives that are lost when justice comes too late. Emily Harris is gone. Her father will carry the weight of her loss forever. Judge David Thompson will serve his sentence, but it will never undo the damage he caused. In the end, justice was served, but at what cost? And how many more stories like this remain untold, waiting for someone to speak? Share your thoughts. Let us know, what do you think could have been done differently? What should happen in cases where those in power become the very criminals they were meant to stop? The conversation doesn't end here. It starts now. The truth isn't always easy to hear, but it's necessary. Stories like this remind us that justice is not just about laws and courts, it's about the people affected, the lives changed, and the lessons learned. The past cannot be rewritten, but what we do with the truth determines the future. Every case like this leaves behind questions, and every discussion we have brings us closer to understanding the deeper flaws in a system that is supposed to protect, not betray. If this story made you think, if it opened your eyes to the hidden dangers of unchecked power, if it reminded you why accountability matters, don't let the conversation stop here. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another true crime story. There are more cases that need to be told, more voices that need to be heard. And in our next episode, we uncover another case that will make you question everything you think you know about justice. Stay with us, because the truth is always more complicated than it seems.